"I want to clear the record that I am innocent. I never killed anyone." These were the final words of Judy Buenoano before she was executed in 1998, becoming the first woman to face the electric chair in Florida since 1848. In this video, we're looking at the haunting last words of women sentenced to death row. Some showed no remorse, others claimed innocence until the very end. From their brutal crimes to their execution and final words, these are the women who faced the ultimate punishment. 15th, Aileen Wuornos. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos, a 33-year-old former sex worker, embarked on a killing spree across Florida, murdering 7 men. Posing as a hitchhiker, she lured her victims into picking her up before robbing and shooting them at point-blank range. While Wuornos initially claimed self-defense, stating that her victims had tried to assault her, the pattern of her killings told a different story. Investigators found that each victim was shot multiple times, their bodies abandoned along highways, and their belongings taken. Wuornos was arrested in 1991 after one of her stolen cars was traced back to her. She confessed to the murders, but later changed her story, claiming law enforcement was conspiring against her. During her trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including testimony from her former girlfriend, Tyria Moore, who had cooperated with authorities. Wuornos was convicted and sentenced to death in 1992. After exhausting her appeals, she eventually asked to be executed, saying she was tired of waiting. On October 9, 2002, at the age of 46, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. In the days leading up to her execution, she displayed erratic behaviour, ranting about mind control and government conspiracies. Witnesses reported that she remained defiant until the very end. Wuornos's final words were unsettling and cryptic. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back. Like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." Wuornos left the world with a bizarre farewell, embracing her execution with an almost theatrical exit. But while she welcomed death, our next case involves a woman who transformed on death row, only to be denied mercy at the last moment. Chitanasti Carla Faye Tucker. On June 13, 1983, 23-year-old Carla Faye Tucker and her boyfriend Daniel Garrett broke into a Houston apartment to steal motorcycles. Inside, they found Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Thornton. What began as a robbery quickly turned into a bloodbath. Armed with a pickaxe, Tucker repeatedly stabbed both victims, later admitting that she felt a thrill with each blow. The brutal nature of the killings shocked even seasoned investigators. Tucker was arrested and charged with capital murder. While awaiting trial, she underwent a dramatic transformation, embracing Christianity and becoming a model inmate. She was convicted and sentenced to death in 1984. Over the years, she became an outspoken advocate for prison reform, and her case drew international attention, with high-profile figures, including Pope John Paul II pleading for clemency. However, Texas authorities refused to overturn her sentence, arguing that the brutality of her crime outweighed any personal change. On February 3, 1998, at the age of 38, Carla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was the first woman executed in the US in nearly 15 years, and the first in Texas since 1863. Witnesses described her as calm and smiling as she entered the execution chamber. Tucker's final words reflected her faith and love for those around her. "I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love you all very much. I will see you all when you get there." Tucker's case stirred a nationwide debate on redemption and the death penalty. But while she found peace in her final moments, the next woman on our list left behind a haunting apology before meeting her fate. 13th, Velma Barfield. In the 1970s, Velma Barfield, a 46-year-old nurse from North Carolina, developed a deadly habit, murdering those closest to her with arsenic poisoning. She first killed her husband, Thomas Burke, making it appear as though he died of natural causes. She later poisoned her boyfriend, Stuart Taylor, and was suspected in the deaths of her mother and several others. Her victims all exhibited similar symptoms before their deaths: nausea, severe illness, and a sudden decline in health. Yet for years, she avoided suspicion. Barfield was arrested in 1978 after an autopsy on Stuart Taylor revealed lethal levels of arsenic in his system. When confronted, she confessed to multiple murders, but insisted she had only meant to make her victims sick, not kill them. Her trial in 1978 ended in a swift conviction, and she was sentenced to death. Like Carla Faye Tucker, Barfield underwent a spiritual transformation on death row, becoming deeply religious. Despite pleas for clemency, her execution date remained unchanged. On November 2, 1984, at the age of 52, Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She became the first woman executed in the United States after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Witnesses described her as composed and prayerful in her final moments. Barfield expressed sorrow for the pain she had caused and thanked those who had supported her. "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years." Barfield's remorse was clear, but not every woman on this list went to her execution with such humility. The next case involves a woman who manipulated men into carrying out her deadly plan, only to find herself in the execution chamber years later. 12th, Teresa Lewis. On October 30th, 2002, 33-year-old Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis orchestrated the murders of her husband, Julian Lewis, and her stepson, Charles Lewis, in Virginia. She didn't commit the killings herself. Instead, she seduced 2 younger men, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, convincing them to carry out the murders in exchange for money from Julian's life insurance policy. On the night of the crime, as Julian and Charles slept, the 2 gunmen entered the house and shot them multiple times, while Teresa waited in another room. When the job was done, she called 911, pretending to be a devastated wife who had just discovered her family had been attacked. Investigators quickly unraveled the truth, discovering that Teresa had spent weeks plotting the murders and promising cash and sex to her accomplices. Phone records and letters further implicated her, and both gunmen testified against her. While Schallenberger and Fuller received life sentences, Teresa, deemed the mastermind, was sentenced to death in 2003. Her defense team argued that she had a low IQ and had been manipulated by her co-conspirators, but the courts upheld her execution. On September 23, 2010, at the age of 41, Teresa Lewis was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. She became the first woman executed in the state in nearly a century. Witnesses described her as peaceful and accepting of her fate in her final moments. Her final words were an apology to the victim's family. "I just want Kathy to know that I love her, and I'm very sorry." Lewis used manipulation to get others to kill for her, but our next case involves a mother who took matters into her own hands, killing the very people she was supposed to protect. 11th, Christina Marie Riggs. On November 4th, 1997, 26-year-old Christina Marie Riggs made a heartbreaking decision. She took the lives of her 2 young children, Justin 5 and Shelby 2, in a planned murder-suicide. Suffering from severe depression, Riggs administered lethal doses of potassium chloride to both children, the same drug used in executions. When the injections failed to work as expected, she smothered them with a pillow. She then attempted to take her own life by overdosing on antidepressants, survived. Riggs was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. She pleaded guilty at trial, expressing remorse for her actions. Despite her defense highlighting her mental illness, the jury sentenced her to death in 1998. Riggs later waived her appeals, saying she accepted her fate. On May 2, 2000, at the age of 28, Christina Marie Riggs was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins unit in Arkansas. She became the first woman executed in the state since 1845. Witnesses reported that she was emotional but calm as she faced her final moments. Riggs expressed deep sorrow before her execution. "There is no way, no words to express how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies, as I always intended." Riggs' crime was one of deep personal anguish, but not every woman on this list killed out of desperation. Our next case takes us to Texas, where a woman used cold calculation to murder her husband and thought she could get away with it. 10. Kelly Renee Gisendana. On February 7, 1997, 28-year-old Kelly Renee Gisendana orchestrated the murder of her husband, Douglas Gisendana, in Gwinnett County, Georgia. She manipulated her lover, Gregory Owen, into carrying out the killing, convincing him that her husband was abusive and that they could start a new life together if Douglas was out of the picture. On the night of the murder, Owen ambushed Douglas, forced him into his own car, and drove him to a remote location where he stabbed him multiple times. Meanwhile, Kelly waited at home to establish an alibi. After the crime, she burned evidence and later played the grieving widow, attending Douglas's funeral without showing any remorse. It didn't take long for investigators to crack the case. Owen took a plea deal and testified against Kelly, describing how she had pressured him into the murder. He received a life sentence, while Kelly, as the mastermind, was sentenced to death in 1998. While on death row, Gisendana underwent a spiritual transformation, becoming a prison minister and earning widespread support for clemency. Religious leaders, including Pope Francis, advocated on her behalf, arguing that she had been rehabilitated. Despite these efforts, Georgia officials refused to grant her clemency. On September 30th, 2015, at the age of 47, Kelly Renee Gisendana was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison. She was the first woman executed in Georgia in 70 years. Witnesses said she sang "Amazing Grace" as she lay strapped to the gurney. Gisendana expressed love and regret before her execution. "I am so sorry to you all. I love you all. I love you, and I am sorry." Gisendana's case divided the public. Was she truly reformed, or was her punishment deserved? The next case, however, left no room for debate. This woman didn't just kill, she preyed on her own husbands, turning marriage into a death sentence. 9. Betty Lou Beets. Betty Lou Beets had a deadly pattern. She married men, collected their insurance money, and left their bodies buried in her backyard. By the time she was arrested, she had been married 6 times, and 2 of her husbands had mysteriously vanished. In 1983, at the age of 46, Beets shot and killed her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, in Henderson County, Texas. She then reported him missing, claiming he had drowned while fishing. To cover her tracks, she convinced family members to help her hide his body in a makeshift grave beneath a wishing well. Authorities later discovered that Beets had also murdered her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, in 1981 and buried him near the same well. Investigators suspected she had attempted to kill other spouses in the past, but they had managed to escape. Beets was arrested in 1985 after her son, who had helped hide one of the bodies under her orders, tipped off police. With overwhelming evidence, including the buried remains and witness testimonies, she was convicted of capital murder in 1985. Beets denied her guilt, claiming she had been framed. Despite numerous appeals arguing that she had suffered abuse in her marriages, Texas courts upheld her sentence. On February 24, 2000, at the age of 62, Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She became the 2nd woman executed in Texas since the reinstatement of the death penalty. Witnesses said she showed no emotion as she was prepared for execution. Beets refused to make any final statement, her silence marking the end of her story. "I don't want to make a statement." Beets turned marriage into a deadly game, eliminating husbands when they were no longer useful. But the woman in our next case didn't kill for money. She believed her execution was a loss for the world because, in her mind, she was winning. 8. Kimberly McCarthy. On July 21, 1997, 36-year-old Kimberly McCarthy brutally murdered her 71-year-old neighbour, Dorothy Booth, in Lancaster, Texas. McCarthy, a former nursing home therapist struggling with drug addiction, tricked Booth into letting her into her home by asking to borrow sugar. Once inside, she attacked the elderly woman, stabbing her 5 times and nearly severing her finger while stealing her wedding ring. McCarthy then used Booth's credit cards to purchase drugs and luxury items, showing no remorse for the crime. Investigators later suspected McCarthy in 2 other similar murders of elderly women, though she was never officially charged for those crimes. McCarthy was arrested the same day and quickly convicted of capital murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including fingerprints, stolen items, and security footage showing her using Booth's credit cards. She was sentenced to death in 1998. Her case drew national attention as she became one of the few black women on Texas death row. She exhausted all appeals with some activists arguing that racial bias played a role in her conviction, but her execution date remained unchanged. On June 26, 2013, at the age of 52, Kimberly McCarthy was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was the 500th person executed in Texas since the reinstatement of the death penalty. Witnesses described her as calm and composed as she faced her final moments. McCarthy's final words reflected her faith and a sense of triumph over death. "This is not a loss, this is a win. You know where I am going. I'm going home to be with Jesus, keep the faith. I love you all. Thank you, Chaplain." McCarthy claimed she was heading somewhere better, but the next woman on our list never accepted her guilt at all. Until her last breath, she swore she was innocent, even as the execution needle entered her arm. 7. Wanda Jean Allen. On December 1st, 1988, 29-year-old Wanda Jean Allen fatally shot her girlfriend Gloria Leathers outside an Oklahoma City police station. The couple had a history of domestic violence, and that night, after a heated argument, Leathers sought refuge at the station. But before she could get inside, Allen pulled out a gun and shot her in the stomach. Witnesses said Leathers collapsed on the steps of the station, pleading for help while Allen stood over her. Shocking as it was, this wasn't Allen's first killing. In 1981, she had served 4 years in prison for the shooting death of another woman, but had been released early. Allen was arrested immediately and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution pointed to her past criminal history and painted her as a repeat offender with a violent streak. Her defense team argued that she had a low IQ and had suffered years of abuse, which contributed to her actions. However, the jury rejected these claims, convicting her in 1989 and sentencing her to death. Her case drew international attention, with civil rights groups and even Amnesty International calling for clemency, arguing that racial bias and inadequate legal representation played a role in her sentencing. Despite these efforts, Oklahoma officials refused to overturn the sentence. On January 11, 2001, at the age of 41, Wanda Jean Allen was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She became the first black woman to be executed in the US since 1954. Witnesses said she appeared nervous but held onto her faith as she entered the execution chamber. Allen's final words echoed a message of forgiveness and spirituality. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Allen's execution sparked debates about race and the justice system, but the next woman on this list was condemned for something entirely different. She didn't pull the trigger herself, she convinced others to kill for her. 6. Frances Newton. On April 7, 1987, 21-year-old Frances Newton carried out a crime that shocked Houston, Texas. She murdered her entire family. Newton was convicted of shooting her husband, Adrian Newton, and their 2 children, Alton, 7, and Farrah, 1, in cold blood inside their apartment. The motive? Prosecutors argued that she had recently taken out a $100,000 life insurance policy on her husband and planned to cash in on the payout. Newton claimed she had nothing to do with the murders, but investigators found a gun linked to the crime hidden in an abandoned house. Gunpowder residue was also found on her clothing. Newton was arrested and charged with 3 counts of capital murder. Despite maintaining her innocence, she was convicted in 1988 and sentenced to death. Over the years, her case became one of the most controversial in Texas history, with supporters arguing that the forensic evidence used against her was unreliable. Multiple appeals were filed, with activists and legal experts claiming that she had been wrongfully convicted. Even as her execution date approached, doubts surrounding her guilt remained. However, the courts upheld her sentence, and Texas authorities refused to grant clemency. On September 14, 2005, at the age of 40, Frances Newton was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was the first black woman executed in the state since the Civil War. Witnesses said she remained composed but visibly emotional in her final moments. Newton used her final words to proclaim her innocence one last time. "I just want to say that I am not guilty. I did not kill anyone." Newton's case left lingering questions, but the next woman on this list had no doubts about her own actions. She didn't just kill, she believed she was making history. Femte Linda Lyon Block. On October 4, 1993, 45-year-old Linda Lyon Block and her common-law husband, George Sibley Jr., were involved in a deadly encounter with law enforcement in Opelika, Alabama. The couple, who were anti-government extremists, had been living off the grid and refused to acknowledge state or federal laws. That day, Officer Roger Motley Jr. approached their car in a shopping centre parking lot after noticing something suspicious. A confrontation ensued, and Block, armed with a pistol, opened fire on the officer. Despite being mortally wounded, Motley managed to call for backup before collapsing. Block and Sibley fled but were soon captured. Officer Motley later died from his injuries. Block and Sibley were both charged with capital murder. Representing themselves in court, they refused to recognise the court's authority, arguing that they were sovereign citizens not subject to US law. The jury took little time in convicting them. Sibley received life in prison without parole, while Block was sentenced to death in 1994. Unlike most death row inmates, Block actively refused appeals, stating she did not want to beg for mercy from a system she did not recognise. On May 10, 2002, at the age of 54, Linda Lyon Block was executed in Alabama's electric chair. She was the first woman executed in the state since 1957. Witnesses described her as defiant until the very end, showing no remorse for her actions. Block used her final moments to express a mix of defiance and sorrow. "I am sorry for what I did. I am a loving and caring person." Block refused to acknowledge the system that sentenced her, but the next woman on our list took a different approach. She spent her final years trying to convince the world she was innocent. 4. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano was a serial killer who left a trail of dead husbands, lovers, and even her own son in her wake. Beginning in 1971, she poisoned her first husband, James Goodyear, with arsenic, making it appear as though he had died of natural causes. She later did the same to her boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris, in 1978. Her most shocking crime came in 1980, when she drowned her disabled son, Michael Goodyear, by pushing him out of a canoe in a Florida river. Michael had become paralysed from a previous arsenic poisoning, which his mother had inflicted on him over time. Investigators later determined that she had committed these murders for insurance payouts, collecting thousands of dollars in life insurance money after each death. Buenoano was arrested in 1983 after attempting to kill her latest fiancé, John Gentry, with a car bomb. As authorities dug into her past, they uncovered the deaths of her previous victims. She was charged with the murders of her husband, son, and fiancé, leading to a conviction and a death sentence in 1985. Despite multiple appeals, Florida courts refused to grant her clemency. She remained on death row for 13 years, maintaining her innocence and claiming she had been framed. On March 30th, 1998, at the age of 54, Judy Buenoano was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. She became the first woman executed in Florida since 1848. Witnesses said she remained quiet and showed no emotion as she was strapped into the chair. Buenoano's final words were simple and firm. "I want to clear the record that I am innocent. I never killed anyone." Buenoano denied her crimes until the very end, but the next woman on this list had no interest in clearing her name. Her last words were even stranger than the murders she committed. 3. Lisa Montgomery. On December 16, 2004, 36-year-old Lisa Montgomery committed one of the most horrifying crimes in modern American history. Posing as a pregnant woman, she befriended 23-year-old Bobby Joe Stinnett online under the pretense of adopting a puppy. She travelled to Skidmore, Missouri, where Stinnett lived, and attacked her in her home. Montgomery strangled the young mother to death with a rope before cutting open her abdomen with a kitchen knife and kidnapping her unborn baby. She later attempted to pass the infant off as her own. Authorities arrested Montgomery the next day after linking her to the crime through online messages. The baby survived and was safely returned to her father. Montgomery was charged with federal capital murder, and her trial gained national attention. Her defense argued that she suffered from severe mental illness, stemming from a childhood of sexual abuse and trauma. However, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation, including internet searches on how to perform a C-section and how to fake a pregnancy. In 2007, she was convicted and sentenced to death. Her case remained highly controversial, with mental health advocates and legal experts arguing that she was too mentally ill to be executed. Despite appeals and clemency requests, including a plea from Pope Francis, the execution was carried out. On January 13th, 2021, at the age of 52, Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. She became the first woman executed by the US federal government in 67 years. Witnesses described her as visibly anxious, breathing heavily in her final moments. Montgomery's final words were brief and eerie: "No." Montgomery's crime was calculated and horrifying, but at least her victim wasn't someone she once loved. The next woman on this list betrayed the one person who trusted her the most: her own husband. 2. Suzanne Margaret Basso. In 1998, 44-year-old Suzanne Basso orchestrated one of the most disturbing murders in Texas history. She lured 59-year-old Louis Buddy Musso, a mentally disabled man, into a fake romantic relationship, convincing him to move from New Jersey to Texas with promises of marriage. Instead of love, Musso found himself at the center of a horrific plot. Basso, along with a group of accomplices, including her own son, tortured Musso for days. They beat him with belts, scalded him with hot water, burned him with cigarettes, and forced him to sleep on urine-soaked floors. When he finally died from the abuse, Basso and her accomplices dumped his body in a ditch and attempted to cash in on his life insurance policy. Basso was arrested soon after the discovery of Musso's body. The evidence against her was overwhelming, with multiple witnesses detailing her role as the ringleader of the torture and murder. In 1999, she was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. During her time on death row, Basso tried to avoid execution by claiming she was mentally incompetent, but psychiatric evaluations found her fit to stand trial and be executed. On February 5, 2014, at the age of 59, Suzanne Basso was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. Unlike many death row inmates, she had no family members present at her execution. Witnesses reported that she showed no emotion as the lethal drugs were administered. Basso maintained her innocence to the very end, with her final words being, "I did not kill anybody." Basso showed no remorse for the cruelty she inflicted, but our final case takes us back to Louisiana, where a woman turned her own badge into a weapon, betraying the very people she swore to protect. 1. Lisa Coleman. In July 2004, 28-year-old Lisa Coleman was arrested for the horrific abuse and murder of her partner Marcella Williams' 9-year-old son, Devonte Williams, in Arlington, Texas. Devonte was found weighing only 35 pounds, severely malnourished, and bearing signs of prolonged physical abuse. The couple had kept him restrained and denied him food, leading to his tragic death from malnutrition and pneumonia. Coleman was charged with capital murder, and during her 2006 trial, prosecutors presented evidence of the severe abuse Devonte endured. Despite arguments from the defense highlighting Coleman's troubled upbringing and claims that the death was unintentional, she was convicted and sentenced to death. Her partner Marcella Williams accepted a plea deal and received a life sentence. On September 17, 2014, at the age of 38, Lisa Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was the 9th woman executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Witnesses reported that she appeared calm and smiled at her supporters in the witness room. In her final statement, Coleman expressed love to her fellow inmates and gratitude to her supporters. "I just want to tell my family I love them. My son, I love him. The girls on the row, I love them and keep their heads up. Tell Darlie I love her and I'll see her on the other side. That's it.